Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February 2022 edition of Green Infrastructure, Climate and Cities, a monthly seminar focusing on the unique challenges that climate change poses for cities and what we can do about it. My name is Franco Montalto, and I'm a professor at Drexel's College of Engineering and one of the lead principal investigators on the Consortium for Climate Risks in the Urban Northeast, a NOAA-funded team of researchers and universities that are investigating the impact of climate change in the urban Northeast and sponsoring this series. If you're joining us for the first time, CC Run began hosting this series back in 2014. All of our past seminars have been archived and are available on the CC Run website. This seminar is being live cast, recorded, and will be archived in the same place. Please feel free to go to the CC Run website to access any of our previous webinars. Continuing education credits are available to attendees of any of these seminars. We thank you again for joining us. Oops. The topic of this month's seminar is Community Resilience Hubs, a model for advancing climate preparedness in Baltimore. Initiated in 2015, Baltimore's Community Resilience Hub program is an innovative and impactful community-centered initiative that increases community capacity to prepare for, withstand, and respond to natural hazard impacts and emergency situations. And here to tell us about Baltimore's program is Aubrey Germ, the Climate and Resilience Planner for Baltimore's Office of Sustainability. Ms. Germ's work entails developing, managing, and implementing a wide range of hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, and community resilience plans and projects. She hails from Cleveland, Ohio, and holds a master's degree in urban planning from Harvard's Graduate School of Design and a BS in environmental health sciences from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Her background includes serving as an assistant program manager for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in both Tangier, Virginia, and Baltimore, and Tangier, Virginia, and Baltimore. And she does independent research on sustainable development around the globe. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Germ for our talk today. During the seminar, please use the Q&A box to submit questions. You can also upvote other questions that have been posed. Don't use the chat for anything other than technical questions if you're having some issues. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a discussion and a chance for Q&A. So with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to you, Aubrey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. One moment while I pull my slides up. All right. Well, I'm very happy to be here today to share a little bit about Baltimore City's Community Resiliency Hub program. I've been in my role in Baltimore City as the Climate Resilience Planner for about 3.5 years now. And this program is kind of one of the many different resiliency and climate adaptation projects and programs that are under my purview. And it is one of my absolute favorites. I am very passionate about this program. And I really hope that you all can learn something about kind of this, this one tool in kind of the resilience toolkit for addressing climate justice, climate equity, and community resiliency challenges in our urban environments. And I will just preface, so this, as kind of mentioned, this is a city managed program, though the program really focuses on centering community voices and community needs around resiliency building. So you all may have heard of resiliency hubs in kind of different ways. I feel like a lot of cities I've heard are really trying to figure out how to get resiliency hub programs off the ground. And there's a lot of different definitions for what a resiliency hub could be, which is very exciting. And it kind of means that cities can figure out how to do them in a way that makes the most sense for the communities that they work with. And some of them are city managed and operated, and some of them are community led at the same time. So, but from our angle in Baltimore, kind of the foundation for our resiliency hub work is in our disaster preparedness plan, which is our hazard mitigation plan. It's a FEMA required plan to kind of lay out the strategy for reducing climate impacts in Baltimore. And one of the ways that we've been able to kind of prioritize the resiliency hub work in Baltimore is by in integrating resiliency hub strategies and actions into this plan, as well as our actually city adopted sustainability plan. So it kind of has a planning foundation. The sustainability office in Baltimore is in the planning department. So a lot of our work does have to be planning centered. And this really kind of creates that foundation for, kind of focusing our time on programs like this and getting the resources and aligning the resources necessary to implement them. So here's just a few of the strategies that are listed in this plan. Increasing the number of resiliency hubs, developing training and guidance documents, and initiating community resiliency planning work. So that really helps justify our work on this project. So this disaster preparedness plan identifies flooding, coastal hazards, precipitation variability, wind, extreme heat, and kind of land hazards as the highest hazards in Baltimore City. So Baltimore being in the mid-Atlantic, we face a lot of heavy precipitation, a lot of humidity, and also some really extreme heat waves that have been coming through. And I know that the Northeast has been facing a lot of these shifting weather patterns as well, and exacerbating weather patterns. This image is actually of a river that runs through this kind of downtown area of Baltimore, and a highway is built over it. You can see the highway pilings there. And this often floods pretty severely in heavy precipitation events, and can create a real hazard for a lot of communities in Baltimore. So it's just an example. But these are really, when we're talking about climate resilience in the city, this is what we're really focused on mitigating and addressing. And so in our work around resiliency, with the Resiliency Hub program, we're really trying to work with our resiliency hubs to understand these risks and better prepare for them. So what is a community resiliency hub? So we very much like to emphasize in Baltimore the community aspect of our program. So we kind of refer to our partners as community resiliency hubs. So these are all community-based organizations, so not city, and they are trusted frontline service-based organizations that are located in Baltimore's most climate vulnerable neighborhoods. They want to partner with the city to become connected to additional resources. They inherently, based on their work as a nonprofit and as a community org, are well connected and well positioned to reach those in Baltimore who are most vulnerable and most at risk. And they are willing to serve, to be that safe space in times of crisis. They probably are, many of them are already serving in that capacity. And so formally working with the city to serve as a city recognized safe space is also really helpful here. These organizations are willing to distribute resources and provide access to items such as drinking water, emergency food, phone charging, and storage for medications. And they're also able to spread awareness and be a voice for climate risk and preparedness. So we find that, working through and with community leaders and community organizations that are well connected to their communities is a really, important way for the city to get more information and more resources out to folks who are most at risk and will be most in need of resources in crisis situations. So having these relationships and these partnerships developed over time, even in non-crisis situations, but really, when is there not a crisis happening these days? But just forming these partnerships and relationships can really, have a lot of benefits if and when things do happen at different scales and magnitudes. So this program developed in Baltimore around 2015, kind of in a pilot phase, where we recruited a few community-based orgs that were really, in some of the more vulnerable communities in Baltimore to participate and help us set the framing for this program. The overall goals of the program are to enhance capacity and resiliency in low-income communities, so kind of enhancing their capacity to respond in emergency situations and to recover. And then, it really kind of at the core It's really trying to help under-resourced communities prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters by the city trying to provide more focused support, investment, and resource delivery around climate. And then overall, we try to use this program as a way to improve emergency response and recovery services, improve relationships, and really work to build trust between the city and community. We know that in a lot of cities, trust of the local government or any government entity can be really hard to have, which makes a lot of sense and is completely understandable. And so it's really the onus on the city to build that trust and really work alongside and with communities to build relationship, to build rapport, and to facilitate two-way communication, particularly around issues of climate justice and climate risk. We also work with these organizations to be that safe space, as I mentioned. And really, this program is actually, especially in the pandemic, evolved to be that conduit for elevating community concerns and voices up to city government, especially around COVID resources. I will talk more about that later. So this program has actually been really instrumental in getting community concerns heard. And then we really recognize that these nonprofit organizations are trusted messengers in their neighborhood. Messages around climate risk, preparedness coming from the neighborhood church or the neighborhood social services organization is going to be better heard and better trusted than messages often coming from government. And so that's one of the core pillars of this program as well. And then, as mentioned, this is very community centered. We really try to work with each organization in this program as to try to understand their definitions of resilience. I feel like that in the science world, climate world, we tend to really think of resilience maybe sometimes in very narrow definitions, but when working with low-income communities that are have many challenges daily, many crisis situations daily, there's a different framing oftentimes for what resilience means. Sometimes it just means getting through a day and having the resources to be able to do that, rather than thinking of resilience in terms of larger scale shocks and stressors. And so that's something that I work really hard to develop with each community leader is, what kinds of resilience building resources do you feel are most needed in your community? So the program components for our community resiliency program include often grant funded support. I will say that actually none of the, other than my staff time, none of the program components are funded by city dollars. It's all been sourced by grant funding, and I continue to try to find more funding to be able to grow and expand and maintain this program on a regular basis. So it's really only been made possible by grants that are out there. And so the different components of this program include trying to outfit each resiliency hub organization with high quality emergency supplies. So these are preparedness and recovery supplies that span from snow blowers to additional walkers and canes, or sump pumps that these community orgs can loan out to residents if necessary or use themselves. To first aid kits, to AEDs, to having adequate refrigeration and additional charging capacity, for example. So emergency supplies can really be broad here, but we just really want to make sure that each organization in this program has access and has on site, at their center, the right kinds of things for different emergency situations. One of the biggest lifts in this program is to find funding to support solar power and battery backup systems. So this really is only feasible at a certain number of the sites, not all of them, because there needs to be, certain rooftop capacity and structural supports kind of on site in order to be able to host rooftop solar, for example. But this is something that is one of the biggest challenges in this program, but one of the most exciting solutions is, right now we actually have 4 of our sites of our resiliency of partner organizations have active solar and battery systems. And we have 3 more that are slated that have funding lined up to receive those systems. And we've been able to we received a grant from the state 2 years ago that supported feasibility studies on the rooftops of up to 30 organizations in the city, so that we can better understand which of these frontline organizations in Baltimore have the highest level of potential for solar and battery systems. So that's been really helpful, and now we're continuing to seek funding for installation, because backup power at these sites is kind of one of the most impactful elements of this program, I think. And our Office of Emergency Management too recognizes that backup power that backup power sites centered in communities can be really helpful as well. So we also try to provide energy efficiency upgrades to the buildings for the organizations in the program, so that they can have lower utility costs. If they have a solar and battery system installed, that will reap more benefits for them kind of in tandem with the energy efficiency upgrades. And then also we try to offer preparedness trainings and workshops. We've done asset mapping with the sites to better understand what community assets exist in their neighborhoods and where there's opportunities for building stronger connections. And then we've also done a tabletop exercise where we've looked at scenarios, like various climate scenarios: snowstorm with a power outage, extreme heat wave with a power outage, or extreme flood event, to help the organizations in the program better visualize and think through how they might be able to respond and support displaced residents or vulnerable members of the community in those times, and then kind of what role they would play as CBOs, and then and as resiliency hubs, and then what role the city would play. So really kind of figuring out that in advance can be really important. So that's something that we were able to get grant funding for a couple years ago, but we should probably do another one again soon, because we've actually expanded the program quite a bit since then. We also try to provide focused communications, connections, education, and support. So during blue skies, kind of just regular times, the Office of Sustainability, which I'm a part of, we really try to maintain those communications with the organizations on a regular basis. I, maintain and build the relationships with each site. And then in acute emergencies, the Office of Emergency Management really kind of takes the lead on coordinating and working with these organizations. Grant funding. So one of the things that we do try to do as well is better connect these organizations with their own grant funding opportunities. So I keep eye and ear to the ground all the time for opportunities for them as nonprofits to be able to apply for funding, so that they can kind of use that funding for their own needs, and even for emergency relief. So I was channeling a lot of the COVID relief grant opportunities through to all the organizations, and even providing technical support to help them fill out the grant applications and write them, and think about budgets and all of that, because some of them are lower capacity or are volunteer led, and so having some additional technical support and writing support on grant applications can be really helpful for these organizations. And then since the pandemic started, I've been hosting monthly meetings with all of the organizations in the program to support peer-to-peer learning. I think there's been a lot of value coming from these organizations learning from each other and the work that they're all doing, and some solidarity as well. And then also information sharing from the city to these organizations. For example, in advance of extreme heat season, our meeting will be focused on what extreme heat resources exist or cooling resources exist, and how the resiliency hubs might be interested in supporting their communities on extreme heat days. And we kind of go through city resources that exist, and work with, for example, with the food bank to try to make sure that all hub sites have ample water on site, so that they can hand out and distribute water to residents on extreme heat days, and adequate information on risks of extreme heat and things like that. So these meetings can be really helpful and timely. and really bring everyone together to learn and for information sharing. So as mentioned, this is really partnership centered. To formalize the partnership between these orgs in the city, we have a memorandum of understanding that all parties sign, just kind of lays out expected roles and responsibilities in potential emergency situations, but it's not by any means like binding or really strict. It's just mostly so that the city and the resiliency hubs recognize, you know, what roles each other plays and where each other can support. So the main city agencies involved in this are the Office of Sustainability, with myself as kind of the program manager. Our Office of Emergency Management is a key partner here. They're on board for the hub program, and I work with them regularly to make sure they understand and know where in the city these organizations exist and what their respective capacities are to support and help community members in emergency situations. OEM also helps with training as well sometimes. And then our Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response, which is part of our health department, has also been an essential partner, especially in the pandemic. They've been really working closely to help channel COVID relief resources to the Resiliency Hub organizations, as well as supporting, vaccine and COVID testing distribution kind of through the resiliency hubs, because oftentimes they're located in ideal spots for continued outreach for hard to reach populations. And so that kind of connection with health has been really critical in building connection with these resiliency hubs as well. And then I will mention, we do have a solar project team, which is comprised of 3 solar partners that really help on the scoping of the solar projects, the design, and the construction of the systems. And really luckily, I mean, when this program first started, there was a lot of troubleshooting that needed to happen to better understand, you know, what even is the possibility of solar and storage on the rooftops of nonprofits in low-income neighborhoods and buildings that are often old and aging, with rooftops that aren't in the best of shape. You know, there's just a lot of groundwork that needed to happen to better understand kind of large scale potential for a program like this. And these partners have done a lot of pro bono work, and a lot have really supported in the visioning of what this can be, and have really stuck through it, and are very, amazing thought partners in this. So right now we have 15 partner organizations in the program. This map only shows 12. I need to get it updated, but this is kind of where they are throughout the city. In Baltimore, the highest vulnerability really exists in East, West, and South Baltimore. And so that's where we focus a lot of our outreach to better understand, what organizations exist there that might want to become resiliency hubs. And we have here kind of a half-mile, quarter-mile radius around each site, which kind of is the theoretical catchment area of each site, just because it's kind of a walkable distance, or a very kind of short distance where we'd hope that the nearby community would see that as their local maybe go-to place. One of the things that we've done to also aid in site selection is some vulnerability mapping, where we kind of merge different data, overlay different data sets that are indicators of risk and vulnerability. So looking at, for example, this map shows urban heat island with single parent households and asthma rates, as well as income and distance from cooling centers or cooling kind of options in the city, which would include libraries and pools and things like that, to really better understand, extreme heat vulnerability hotspots that might exist for certain populations in the city. So you can kind of see here, like I mentioned, kind of that East and West Baltimore concentration of risk and vulnerability. And so we've done a series of maps like this with different overlays to better understand, where we should kind of zoom in, which neighborhoods we should zoom in on to establish partnerships and connections to frontline organizations that might be interested in serving in a resiliency hub capacity. And I think I'd be remiss to not recognize that there's different capacities at all these organizations. Non-service-based nonprofits can range from the small corner church to a really large-scale homeless services organization, to kind of anything in between there. And so and then some of them have kind of large staff on hand with an executive director and assistant and things like that. And then there's some others that are mostly volunteer driven and led. And so recognizing that there's varying capacities at these sites, we've kind of developed a internal tiering system where tier 1 is the larger capacity hub sites and tier 3 are the smaller capacity. And then we try to, tailor the resources available to each as much as we can so that it, really lines up with what each kind of organization has self-identified that they're able to, respond and help in emergency situations. So there's some that are like, any and all emergency situations, like, please contact us, please let us know how we can help. We want to be there for the community. We have capacity, we have, the ability to quickly organize and activate. And then some, are really still want to help serve a capacity building and resiliency role, but might not have a rooftop that's suitable for solar and storage. So they might not be able to really be that like microgrid site or that backup power site. But, and maybe they are also volunteer led and really might not be able to respond and organize quickly, but they still really want to help with resource distribution. They want to help with community education and awareness of risks, things like that. So, we really recognize that there's all these kind of nuanced differences, but we want, to be able to have a program where all the organizations that really care about this work have a role to play in it. So I want to get to some examples here. I know I've talked a lot about the program components very broadly, but this is an example of, I would call this one of our tier 1 resiliency hubs. It's like just, has quite a large capacity and does just so much work on a regular basis to reach vulnerable individuals with resources. This is City of Refuge. They're in South Baltimore. This is this is their youth services building. And you can see the before where they kind of before condition of their rooftop. We were able to receive grant funding from the state to kind of upgrade their roof and install a solar power and battery backup system. And so here's kind of the roof replacement and then the solar installation that was just completed last year. And kind of on the bottom, you can see the battery system, which is in their utility area. And then the side view there, which shows that the solar panels actually extend all the way down the side of the building. And so this is just a good example of the impact that this program has had in for one of our hub sites. So the hubs have also been extremely active in the pandemic, serving as critical emergency food distribution sites, COVID testing sites, and vaccination sites. As mentioned, effective at reaching vulnerable populations. They're well located, and a lot of them were able to mobilize quite a bit of volunteer support. And because they're not city-led, they're often, more trusted than some of the city-managed resource sites in the pandemic. And I've heard a lot of positive feedback from the community orgs in the program that, that really kind of channeling resources through them has, really kind of converted some residents that might not ever, seek support from city services, but they've, been able to kind of convert some of the skeptical community members by being that regular, like, community-based site that, regularly has testing or regularly has vaccination clinics. So that's just, exciting feedback to hear. And also in Code Red season, a lot of these sites have been supporting water and box fan distribution. That was something that the city was able to do, is purchase a large quantity of box fans to help people stay cool at home in the pandemic, in a socially distanced way. And so you can see there quite a few fans. This is one of the resiliency hubs in West Baltimore, kind of in all the resources that they're working to get out to their community. And then also PPE, working with the health department to make sure that, and other donors, to make sure that these sites have all the PPE that they need, both for their volunteers and to distribute to the community. Another example, so one of our hubs in central Baltimore, the Franciscan Center, recently rose to the occasion to help their community during a fire. So it's a pretty large fire in a building nearby, where actually I don't think our Office of Emergency Management reached out, but the Franciscan Center, being the amazing community-facing organization that they are, quickly mobilized and started making breakfast sandwiches and coffee, tea, and water for all the fire department personnel and the displaced residents during this whole situation. Apparently, the fire department was out there for 8 hours from the middle of the night all the way through to mid-morning. And so this kind of support, where the city is working with the community and these hub organizations are working to support in any way that they can, is just really powerful and really exciting, because this is the kind of partnership and connection that the program is really all about. And then some other examples of how the resiliency hubs have been supporting their community. So in the bottom left picture there, you can see a pile of sand. So one of our hubs, Still Meadow Community Fellowship, is located in Southwest Baltimore, which is actually right along a very flood prone corridor called Frederick Avenue. Many of you might have heard of a massive flood that took out a town in Maryland called Ellicott City. That was most known for really destroying that historic downtown in Ellicott City. Well, that same flood had devastating impacts in a community in Southwest Baltimore, right along Frederick Avenue, and this church is right there on Frederick Avenue. And they played a huge role in supporting their community and first responders in the response and recovery of this devastating flood. And this is a majority Black community, and it received very little press. Ellicott City's devastation really took front and center, but this neighborhood of Baltimore really did not get much attention at all, but had really severe impacts. And so one of the things that this partnership has been able to do is we've been able to work with our Department of Transportation and our Department of Public Works to better to work with this church to better prepare their community for potential flood risks, so that the severity of a flood event like that does not happen again. And so we've been able to work with them proactively to distribute sandbags to residents to shore up basements and door frames in advance of flood risk season. And so you can see their community members filling up sandbags. This church also was able to host a certain number of sandbags throughout the spring and summer season, so that as flood warnings or storm warnings kind of came through, residents were able to conveniently pick up sandbags. And that was never done before in the city. So this was a very exciting collaboration, and will hopefully continue moving forward. And then you can see the scale of emergency food distribution there also at Still Meadow that was happening. And through the program, they were able to receive some National Guard support and additional emergency food supplies. So some other examples there. For some of the workshops and trainings that we do with these partners, there you can see Still Meadow, that's that same church, they were able to host one of our workshops. This is the tabletop training that I mentioned, where we were able to do scenario-based training with the organizations. And then this is the asset mapping that I had mentioned. I worked with an intern to kind of throughout a summer strategically map kind of the quarter-mile radius around each hub in the program to kind of see what potential assets existed. And then we asked the community members during this workshop to identify the places, the partners, the institutions that they see as assets, and then also identify where they didn't have connections or partnerships yet. And so those would be the opportunities for building stronger connections. For example, one of the things we learned from one of our hub organizations in West Baltimore was that they did not have a good working relationship with the gas station and convenience store down the road. But they were kind of at first like, why would we need that partnership? And then they realized, oh, in an emergency, they might actually be useful to help provide ice. For example, if there was a power outage in an extreme heat wave, having a relationship already developed with the corner store could help, yeah, with ice, with beverage distribution, with food, things like that. And so that's a connection that they were able to realize could be very helpful and important in emergencies. So this asset mapping workshop, I think, was helpful in a lot of ways to just recognize, where capacity for more relationship building could exist. So I don't know if any of you in the audience are interested in kind of figuring out how to partner with your city community to develop resiliency hubs, but I just have a few slides on design and social considerations. As mentioned, there's many ways to do a program like this, or even do a pilot project to establish one hub site. But I just have some, kind of just general questions to kind of ask yourself in thinking about, what it might take. So, what hazards are you designing the hub to withstand? Would a potential site be kind of in the high risk area or proximal? Who are you designing it for? Who's most vulnerable in kind of an obvious way, but then thinking about the nuances of those that might be vulnerable but aren't so obvious. For example, I heard that there were a lot of folks in the pandemic, heard from the community that lost their jobs in the pandemic and were kind of food insecure, maybe for the very first time in their life, just because they lost their main source of income. And so they felt more comfortable going to a community site in their neighborhood to seek support and food help than they would, going to a city operated site where they might need to check ID or, check for, have certain requirements. So, or income requirements, for example. So just an example there. How would, you potentially interact with the hub during blue skies or normal conditions versus emergency activities? How can blue skies times be used to help prepare or build awareness of risks? Would a hub program potentially support retrofitting existing buildings, which is what Baltimore's is based on? Or would it be new construction? I've heard of some other cities kind of really, at the blueprint stage of a new building, thinking about how can this building be a hub? And then it might be like, a LEED certified building that has solar and storage already kind of built in on the early construction designs. So, there's different ways to do that. Thinking about a non-governmental site versus governmental, there's a lot of trade-offs there. How can hubs support first responders and recovery personnel? I kind of gave an example there of how one of our hubs supported the fire department in a really critical time. Some of our resiliency hubs have parking lots, for example, where they've served as like supporting staging areas for recovery personnel to help get information out to residents. That hub in Southwest Baltimore along the flood corridor there, they've opened up their parking lot and their church to all the first responders that supported in the recovery from that flood. So they opened up to the Red Cross, Team Rubicon, our fire department, our emergency management folks. They even housed some of the volunteers and the recovery folks overnight, just because it was more convenient. And, they were also helped feed people too. I think that's a lot of what these organizations take to heart, is that feeding folks, helping people know where their next meal is coming from, giving people the energy to recover and to help aid in recovery is really critical. So what are some assets that these sites might have? Parking lot, large room, things like that. Roof conditions, like I mentioned, really big consideration there. What might the gathering and meeting space be? And what might it be outfitted with? Would the site have bathroom access or overnight accommodation support? What is the storage like for food or for supplies, or to accommodate deliveries? Continuity of communications, what systems are needed, what can be built in, what is the internet strength of the site like, things like that. And then accessibility, obviously very important for wheelchair access or hearing, seeing impairment accommodations. And you can see on the bottom there, those are actually screenshots of the outside of a lot of our what our hub buildings look like. So you can see there's a lot of variety in appearance and in roof shape and size. And, that really is the kind of demonstrates the types of organizations and the buildings that we're working with. So that's it for me. I would love to hear any questions that you all have. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Aubrey. We have a lot of questions. So I'm going to do my best to try to sort of consolidate some of them into certain categories and pose them to you sort of together. So the first category I'd say is sort of question about self-determination. Like, to what extent do the hubs, in the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned some goals. To what extent can the hubs sort of modify those goals? And to what extent do they actually get involved in helping to co-shape policy or to establish planning objectives for their neighborhood?
Sure. So, I will start by saying that really this program is always evolving and being shaped by the community orgs and the leaders that are in the program. So a lot of these goals have evolved, and a lot of them actually very much evolved in the pandemic, because we realized that there is a lot of, additional support that these organizations can provide that, like the city, we never really kind of anticipated at the forefront, like their amazing ability to get resources out to folks, and to reach, the very hard to reach individuals that the city is not effective oftentimes at reaching. And so we realized that there was a lot of that drive coming from these organizations to support resource distribution. They were like, give us PPE, we will get it out. Give us fans, we will get it out to people. Get us more food, we will get it. We will always find the people that need it. And so hearing that, really supported kind of our thinking of the work that the hubs, want to do. And how the city can, again, continue building that trust with them and supporting them. I also heard a lot from these organizations that, kind of at the beginning of the COVID testing and vaccination work that was going on, when the city was standing up mass testing or mass vax sites, like at the M&T Bank Stadium, Raven Stadium in downtown Baltimore, or, kind of these larger sites where you're trying to get to a lot of people. I was hearing from these organizations, like, a lot of them, again, I have relationships, they'll pick up the phone and call me and let me know what they're thinking, which I love. And they'll be like, some of the people in our community are just not about to drive to downtown Baltimore to go to a mass vax site. They are just not. So, but if we partner with the city, we can't just host one vax site at our church, for example. We need it to come consistently and regularly, so that folks know that it's for them and that they can rely with that we are a reliable source for that information and for that resource. That's the only way we're going to convince, those who are unsure about getting vaccinated, especially in, some of the communities in Baltimore. That's the way we're gonna win them over. And so I was able to relay that to the health department, and many of those organizations that were like, we want to serve as a vax site consistently, not just once, but consistently. They were able to convince the health department that was necessary, and then they were able to, kind of serve in that role in a regular, consistent way. So just, as an example, for how this program continues to evolve, and kind of the role that those orgs want to play. That's kind of, I feel like my responsibility is to translate that, kind of hear from them what they're interested in doing and participating in and supporting, and what their community needs are. And then figuring out on the city side, like what resources exist here that we can, partner with them on getting out to folks, or, what communications, things like that.
Great. So it seems like there's a lot of flexibility there.
Yes. Yeah. And for example, one of the orgs really cared about, being that partner to help decrease the digital divide in their neighborhood. And I was able, it's not part of the resiliency hub program to do that. We don't have the funding for large scale, like support on internet access and digital access, although that's a great direction to head. But I was able to be like, hey, you're really interested in that as part of resiliency building and capacity building. I'm going to try to connect you with nonprofit partners that are working on digital equity in the city, and grant funding that could potentially support that. So again, another example of that flexible, like, adaptability of each site and kind of what the program is trying to support.
Great. So then there's sort of another cluster of questions about sort of criteria for creating a hub. And I'll sort of cite some of the questions. Like one, is there a strict definition of a climate vulnerable neighborhood, or, could a hub be anywhere? And who first organizes the hubs? Is it a community-based organization that sort of puts their hand up? And what do you do if there's sort of competing organizations in a particular neighborhood? Has that happened? And there's a question also about sort of an application. I mean, is there a formal application process, or is it sort of an informal, nomination process? And then the last one sort of in this category is the number of active members. So do you have to have, to be designated a hub, do you have to have certain staffing that you commit to, or can anyone sort of stand up and say, hey, we'll do it?
A lot of questions at once. I might have you drop maybe the first one or two, and then I'll get to the other ones. Sorry.
Sure, like the definition of a climate vulnerable neighborhood.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I think so. I showed the vulnerability map that kind of helps us. Here, I can go back to it. Let's see. Better understand from kind of a data perspective, where there's real vulnerability to these risks. But in general, Baltimore City is still a very divided, inequitable, and segregated city. There's a lot of need in a lot of under-resourced neighborhoods, like I said, kind of in that East and West and South Baltimore area. And so, I think there's, it's very important to think about climate risk in terms and climate vulnerability in terms of like real impacts and real risks to floods, to heat, to things like that. However, at the same time, I think it's understanding that vulnerability can also exist in those neighborhoods that just don't have limited access to resources to even be able to prepare for whatever might come their way, or to recover, or to even have access to the right kinds of transportation to evacuate if needed, or to even have a couple, be able to have a couple days worth of food and water and supplies on hand. So I think recognizing that vulnerability also extends to just lack of resource access or pre-existing health conditions that might cause a climate impact to hit them harder or to affect them more, like asthma, for example. So I think there's just a lot of things that you could look at, a lot of indicators of vulnerability that we're very, aware of. And so when thinking about where a hub could be located, in general, there are potentially, like in this map, showing like high pockets of really high vulnerability, but generally there's a lot of need everywhere. And as I mentioned, we see resiliency hubs as a tool for building capacity, building resilience, improving preparedness. But again, I think investing in these organizations as community anchors with the solar and battery and with additional resources and all of that, it can just really kind of lead to more investment down the road, showing that community is organized around resilience, showing that they're connected and partnered with the city and are a trusted source of information, things like that. It can really, again, get at that climate justice, climate equity issue in so many ways. And I would say that we try to think of it as broader need than just specific like climate vulnerability.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're not turning down a neighborhood because it's not flood prone or not heat vulnerable. If they've mobilized and organized and have identified the need, they're gonna be a hub.
Yeah, as much as we have the resources available to kind of onboard new hubs, and I would say there's a lot of like low cost things that, like, as I mentioned, in all of the kind of support that we try to provide, the trainings, the workshops, the meetings, those kinds of things can really even just open the door for organizations to get involved without, even if the program doesn't have like, all the funding right away to support, the backup power, and because those things are always in progress. I'm always trying to fundraise. So yeah, we're always very open about like, if there's a will, you want to get involved, love to have you. There's so many resources that we want to share, awareness that we want to spread around this work, the connection, again, the two-way communication, so important. So yeah, I would say while having guidelines for what a hub can and should do and be, there's still, I wouldn't never say like we would turn away an organization who's interested in participating in some way, which is why we kind of developed, where did I put it? This like tiering. So those, that might not be like the shiny gold star just because of, different circumstances or situations. We still, still has strong community ties, still has access to, supporting individuals that the city wouldn't otherwise, things like that.
So just to build in that second part of the question then, like, so it sounds like any organization can kind of raise their hand and apply to be a hub. I mean, is it an application process where, I mean, you don't turn them down, but do they have to, how does that work? I mean, how does a community get in? And what happens if there's more than one community-based organization that wants to represent a particular geography?
No, I think that's a great question. I would say so far we really haven't had that problem yet. There's no direct application process, but I think like as the program evolves, that could be a decent next step. So far, it's really just like, you want to be a part of the conversations. We have these monthly meetings. Please join. Please be a part of the conversation. And I'm keeping track of all the organizations that are really interested in keeping involved in the long term. You'd say that if one of the orgs wants to be in the hub or in the hub program, that they would need to commit to a certain number of years in just being an active kind of participant in all of the stuff that kind of goes on with the program. And then we have a memorandum of understanding, which kind of formalizes, like, especially once the solar and battery system potentially, gets funded to be installed on an organization. That's kind of when that's definitely need to formalize this as, this investment is being put into this community org. We gotta make sure that they're committed for a certain number of years. So we try to, make sure that we mention, that they're committed to serving in that role for the foreseeable future. So the memorandum of understanding is that kind of formalization of the partnership.
And so things like a minimum number of members, that would be sort of stipulated in there based on what the hub is supposed to be, the services that the hub is supposed to be providing.
Yeah, and I would say there's no real like members. It's just, do they have leadership that can support, the operation of the site in an emergency? That a building's manager that would be able to open the doors if necessary, and so there's those like respective roles and responsibilities, and we ask each site to identify like their top 3 contacts, basically. A local person who lives nearby that is really close to being to the building, and other folks that might be instrumental in working with the community and those types of situations. But there's no mandate that if an emergency situation happens and the resiliency hub cannot open, there's not going to be any liability for that. It's just that's understanding that they all have different capacities and are obviously have a lot of willpower to do that work, but recognizing that depending on the scale and size of emergency, the hubs might need to, the folks that manage and run the organization, they might not be able to even get to the site, for example. So
Okay. Then there's a few questions about a resiliency plan, which you talked about, and how it differs, for example, from an emergency plan or sort of a survival plan, and whether the resiliency plan includes, sort of things like building rain gardens, adaptation strategies or mitigation strategies. I mean, how vast or specific is the resiliency plan?
Sure. So this workshop really supported each site thinking through their own operations in different emergency scenarios. And we have, and it also depends on the site's kind of land, I guess. So some of the orgs are like very urban. It's just like the size of their land is just the size of the building, and they're really like on the sidewalk, for example, and don't have space for potentially a rain garden or, other sort of mitigation on site that they could do. But like Still Meadow, the church there on the left, they have 10 acres of forested land that is, again, in that flood prone corridor, and they are working really hard with lots of partners. I would say it's not part of the Resiliency Hub program, but it's still, they're kind of in their own work as an organization to be that go-to place in their community. They're working with our tree folks in the city, our water resources, nonprofits like Blue Water Baltimore is one, for example, to restore their forest in a way that makes it more of a stormwater catchment area, and to have it be more of a high functioning forest than it was, because it was kind of overrun with, for example, dead ash trees and a lot of vines. And so they were able to work with a lot of partners to restore that forest. Every year they plant more trees on that land, and they're continuing to figure out how to make their parking lot less of a runoff site for stormwater and more of a mitigation tools. And they also have a cistern. They were able to get funding to have a cistern on site and rain barrels. And they also have solar panels and solar power and battery backup power, from the hub program. So they're really, like, I would say they're the gold standard. They're really like trying to do it all, but they also have the land and they have the leadership to be able to do all of that. And they're also the ones that wanted to shore up their Wi-Fi and digital access work too. So yeah, so that's just an example of all of that, but depends on the site and depends on what they're able to organize themselves enough to kind of do and take on.
And is the same true for the emergency supplies that you provide to a hub? Is it sort of variable depending on what the hub wants to do, or is there a sort of core sort of kit of supplies that every hub gets?
I would say there's more of a core kind of supply list. If, for example, the city can't fundraise to buy the supplies to give them to the hubs, which sometimes happens because finding supply grants are really challenging, there's a couple grant opportunities out there that nonprofits can apply to, not city entities, but nonprofits that are for community emergency safety, things like that. So for example, our utility, Baltimore Gas and Electric, puts out this community emergency safety grant every year where like nonprofit or volunteer fire departments can apply for additional supplies, or but then lately resiliency hubs have been able to, that's been a great opportunity for some of these partners to apply, or they're kind of I would call them like wish list supplies. Like some of them have really wanted certain kind of high ticket items that I just can't fundraise for, but that they're able to apply for. And then I will write a letter of support for their grant applications, kind of validating that they're a resiliency hub and that emergency supplies can really support and help the work they do to improve safety and resilience in their community. So a couple examples there, but yeah. So I would say like every site we try to make sure has additional first aid capabilities. Snow blower is really important for making sure their sidewalks are accessible for all types of folks to be able to access the resources that they have. Sump pumps, a lot of basements in Baltimore flood. And so they have those on site to be able to loan out to residents. So yeah, I would say there's like, we have a list that we try to keep, and I also share that out with new hubs. Like once they come, new organizations, once they join the program, I'll send them the list along with, potential grant opportunities and say, like, if you guys are able, to apply for these kinds of supplies, we really think that, each site should have these on hand, and I'll help you with that application, stuff like that.
Is that list available on a website that if folks were interested?
It's not, but I'm happy, to like share, some stuff that we've got, on that list.
Okay, great. There's a couple of questions about, sort of documenting benefits and the role of educational institutions. So, have you been able to investigate, looking at neighborhoods that have hubs and neighborhoods that don't have hubs, if, in a particular emergency, if the hub actually made a difference, and in doing that, is there a role for different kinds of educational institutions or scientific institutions? Do you collaborate with universities, with museums, with other types of science organizations to do some of that research?
It's a fabulous question. I would say that is an area that I haven't really explored. I think it's really hard to quantify the benefits of the work that these organizations do, because namely, these are all service-based nonprofits that do community-facing work all the time. So it's really hard to say, like, when are they operating as their community org just naturally, and then when are they a hub, and then like what does, how to quantify, like, oh, if they weren't a hub, they wouldn't maybe have acted in this way. Therefore, the benefit of the program shows that, like, as a hub, they were able to support X number of people. Like, I would love to hear more if there's academics on the call that think that there'd be ways to really document and quantify the benefits. I would say mostly I think about, like, how many incidents potentially, like, have hubs supported on, or just even risen to the occasion for, like that fire that one hub supported, or we even had an explosion, crazy gas explosion in Northwest Baltimore 2 years ago, where the closest hub was a mile down the road, but they still reached out and were like, how do we help? What do? We want to support the community. And so they were actually able to get connected to the Office of Emergency Management, connected to the housing department, because it was a house-based explosion, and really provide support for displaced residents, even including supporting some of their rehousing that happened. So yeah, I think it's mostly and this is something I'm really working to try to do, which is this question's getting at, is have a form for these sites to fill out after they kind of support an emergency, kind of like a small scale after action report, so that we can better document, what did they do, how did they do it, how many people did they help, and any costs incurred potentially, because I really want this program to get to a point where we can support these organizations for any additional costs that they've taken on for the additional community help that they provide. So yeah, I think there's a couple ways that it could be quantified. It's a challenge to quantify the benefits for it, for sure. And then also for federal funding, like FEMA's having a lot more, kind of open up for resiliency grants, but there's still a lot of like benefit cost analysis that needs to happen in order to have strong proposals. And I think that's a real challenge with a program like this, is being able to justify and say that the benefits, outweigh the costs potentially. But there's so many, because these are, again, located in very low income communities, very vulnerable communities. Is there really a return on investment in the near term? It depends on the scale of emergencies that come through. Like, yeah, this is very challenging. But
and in fact, you mentioned FEMA, and that was one of the questions actually,
yeah.
asking if any of this is FEMA funded, and if you, I don't know, is it BRIC funded? Are there any, is there any contribution of FEMA to the hub program?
Hasn't been yet. The BRIC funding, I feel like has a lot of potential to support something like this, but as the program stands, again, that benefit cost analysis requirement would kind of prohibit, I think, program like this. But what I do have a grant proposal in for potentially to FEMA, it's right now with the state, is the HMGP 5% initiative, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program 5% initiative. That's a smaller pool of funding. And again, it's based on, because the HMGP grant opportunity is based on presidential disaster declarations. But that 5% initiative precludes having to do the benefit cost analysis. It just needs a narrative cost effectiveness kind of document that shows that, the benefits generally outweigh the costs, but otherwise would be very hard to quantify. So I have an application in to establish many of these sites as microgrids through that FEMA program. So we'll see. It's in process right now. I don't know, but I have spoken with other cities that are also really interested in figuring out how to unlock FEMA funds for more social resilience and capacity building programs like this. Because there's so many benefits that it's really hard to quantify, especially the social capital.
Yeah, talking about social capital, someone was interested in the asset mapping methodology that you used. Is that a standard methodology? Have you published it anywhere? How would someone replicate that process?
Oh yeah, so this was a lot of this was based on the creativity of a fabulous intern that I worked with for a summer, who took like a GIS map, which you can kind of see the building footprints under there, and then walked around the quarter mile around each site, took photos of, you know, community farms or other assets nearby, and kind of, you know, dropped them in to help with, you know, folks who were at the workshop better kind of remind them, like put themselves in the neighborhood and be like, oh yeah, I walk by that community garden all the time, or I know that corner store, for example, so that it's not just looking at a top-down GIS map, but is a little more personalized to the neighborhood. So that was something that she decided to do. It was very creative, very thoughtful. And then you can kind of see each, you know, colored building or colored site has, you know, 4 different, if you kind of follow the lines out to the side, it has 4 different kind of colors there. And we asked each organization to kind of mark with the X or a symbol the strength of the hub's relationship with that site. So they filled it out, kind of, you can see all on the edge there, like if they had a strong relationship or a weak relationship. And then we went back through it with them and had them circle the ones that had the like weaker relationship as opportunities for building further connection and partnership. And then we shared these back out with each site so that they had them to review and think about, you know, oh yeah, that's right, we identified this site or this community institution or this community garden as a potential asset in an emergency, but, you know, opportunity to build stronger connection there. So yeah, I think really this was based on some, you know, standard asset mapping, but then, you know, we really tried to customize it so that it felt like it was for each organization and their neighborhood.
That's great. And there's an interesting question here about how do you set expectations with community members if they assume that the Resilience Hub will be a shelter during a particular emergency, but then emergency management chooses not to activate that location? Is that, I'm assuming that if it's, you know, there would be a difference in the amount of resources that the hub would be able to assume would be at their disposal, or how does that work?
So we haven't really had that issue yet with like overnight sheltering, because I think one of the things that the Resiliency Hub program is not really, we don't in the MOU, it doesn't really say anything about like, if you're a Resiliency Hub, you need to potentially participate in overnight sheltering or have cots or overnight capabilities, things like that, because, you know, there's different requirements for like bathrooms and food and all sorts of things. But the city, right, has like city managed shelter sites. But if a Resiliency Hub were interested, for example, in an emergency, in cots being brought in response and recovery personnel, you know, supporting sheltering at that site, I think that would be communication that would happen, again, depending on the nature of the emergency, with the emergency management folks and the Resiliency Hub. And it would be kind of worked out just, you know, case by case. But there's no one standard, like if you're a hub, you need to be able to participate in sheltering. Interestingly, the city's Department of Transportation with our emergency management office is updating the city's mass evacuation plan. And they're really been engaging with the resiliency hubs on, you know, how would a resiliency hub be interested in supporting the community in an evacuation scenario? And they developed a survey that the resiliency hubs are actually filling out. I'm going to send it out to them tomorrow. So to better understand their capacity and interest in serving either as a site for, you know, transportation to come pick up folks and help evacuate, or for overnight sheltering, or for just getting the word out to community members about a potential evac scenario. So we're really just trying to figure out right now, like, what are the resiliency hub organizations interested in doing in an evacuation if they're able to help? So that's another example. So kind of the roles and capabilities of each site, it depends, but there's always more kind of in the works and in conversation around what they can do.
Great. How are you doing? You okay? Because as these questions keep coming in, so.
I'm glad people are interested and engaged. I'm happy to keep answering as long as people aren't tired of hearing me talk yet.
No. Okay, so here's an interesting one. How do you, in developing these hubs, how have you addressed any mistrust or sort of hesitancy to participate that may have been expressed by a community that's been, not treated well in the past, and is sort of not sure if this is for real or not?
Sure, absolutely. Very real scenario. It has happened a few times, especially because I think I'd mentioned that we had funding to do feasibility studies for just to even see if solar and battery storage was feasible on the rooftops of up to 30 organizations in the city. So we did a lot of outreach to community orgs to see if they would be interested in the assessment. Again, just assessing feasibility. We were like very clear, this is not, making you be a part of the hub program if you don't want to be, but we just really want to better understand the potential for solar and storage at sites around the city because we have this funding. We were met with some resistance in that outreach. Some sites didn't respond. Like there were many that just weren't interested, probably thought we were trying to sell them something, which I did hear. Like some of the orgs that are already in the program, like Still Meadow, they're always very real with me. We have a very good working relationship, and they're just like, Aubrey, like, so people probably think you're trying to sell them something. And even if you say it's free and it's just an assessment and it's no strings attached, there's probably that skepticism that what is this? Like, I don't, and so they're, hesitant to respond. And so that was very real feedback that I received. I was not quite sure how to work around that other than what I heard from some of the community leaders is just picking up the phone and calling rather than just being behind an email. Can be really helpful in kind of extending the connection and really trying to get people's ear, I guess, on this opportunity. There were a couple sites I talked to on the phone about the feasibility study, about the hub program, and they expressed interest. But then I think when they went back and talked to leadership, they were like, actually, we don't have the capacity to take on any additional community work, which is also very real and understandable. But never really had anyone explicitly say we don't trust partnering with the city, but just more that kind of passive, no response is kind of an answer, at least in that outreach that we did for, again, the feasibility study for solar and battery storage.
Great. I'm going to try to hit two questions on funding. Is there any possibility that the infrastructure bill could be used to support hubs? And then if not, what are the sort of other ideas of perhaps long-term making the hubs financially sustainable or self-sustaining?
Yeah, it's tricky. I would really like the infrastructure bill to be able to support the programs like this. What I have heard is that it really is going to be dependent on what programs states develop to allocate the funds down to local jurisdictions. So, I think the possibility for states and municipalities to develop grant programs centered around, social resilience, climate resilience, capacity building, things like that, that maybe have some infrastructure work associated with them would be really great. But I think it just depends on what shape those funding mechanisms take. I just don't have enough insight and knowledge to know that yet. But generally speaking, our main source of grant funds for the solar work and for the energy efficiency work comes from our state energy administration. They're called MEA, Maryland Energy Administration. And they've developed grant programs kind of specifically geared towards solar and storage solutions or energy efficiency solutions in low-income communities. So those are programs that have been really helpful for us. Long-term, I think the more flexible that grant programs can be, the better. I think we're really working to try to figure out how to integrate energy efficiency with solar and storage. There's very few grants that allow you to apply for comprehensive building envelope retrofits plus solar and storage installation. they're usually like, apply for energy efficiency, apply for solar, systems. And they usually have different grant timelines and different periods of performance rather, and different amounts and different timeline. Like it can be really hard to be able to streamline that or find opportunities where that can be streamlined. Again, we're really trying to reduce the burden on these organizations. The city is really just trying to help provide resources, funding, support, access, things like that, where, and not create additional work and additional interruptions basically to these orgs. So that's one of the challenges for sure. And I think that would be really helpful for programs like this. If there was integrated energy efficiency, solar and storage opportunities. And then also like I said, the supplies funding is really hard to find. I think a lot of funders want things that have like more clear metrics and kind of impact than just saying, oh, we were able to purchase X amount of money in supplies, because they want to, see kind of results. So it's just hard to find those opportunities. It'd be great if there was a grant opportunity to kind of support all elements of the program, but I've really just been over the years, like just piecing together what I can for maybe 1 or 2 sites at a time or 5 sites. The application I submitted to FEMA was for 13 sites to become microgrids, but that's again only for the solar and storage piece. So who knows? But yeah, there's a lot of work here, but I think hopefully the more programs like this are stood up and kind of advocating for the importance of it, I think hopefully funding opportunities will evolve to include both technical, quantifiable and technical resiliency projects with this that incorporate the social resilience side as well. I hope.
You mentioned that there were some hard to reach individuals. So can you say anything more about who's been hard to reach and why, and the strategies for trying to reach them?
So the hard to reach individuals, really, those relationships are maintained by the organizations themselves with their community. So the strategies for reaching those folks are not, driven by the city, but rather the natural inherent connections and trust that these hub organizations have with their communities. For example, the Franciscan Center, they really, the ones that responded to support the fire department in that community fire, they specialize in homeless services and emergency food support. And so in the pandemic, like they've been trying to work a lot to figure out like where are the homeless encampments in Baltimore, and they have been putting together like meal packages basically and driving out to the homeless encampments to distribute the food. So they have that, and other resources. So they have that kind of front, facing connection to folks at the city. The Baltimore City does have a mayor's office of homeless services that also supports populations facing homelessness. But, I think sometimes the community-based organizations have a better connection and are more trusted than sometimes city personnel. So there's just, being able to partner with the Franciscan Center on, getting additional resources out to those folks, for example, is just one example. And then also the hard to reach folks for like vaccination and COVID testing. It was that kind of connection to the health department to kind of work with the hub sites to host COVID testing and vaccination so that they could better reach the hard to reach people, or those who are still skeptical rather too.
So yeah, so this, you already answered a couple of questions about, so this is building sort of community leadership and elevating those who have those connections already in the community. So I'm going to knock those out there. There's another question here on one of your slides, the design and social considerations section. You talked about the mental health considerations that go into selecting meeting spaces. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So yeah, I think one of the things to think about, right, when there's an emergency that has happened or potentially people are displaced from their homes, these individuals might have kids, babies, or seniors, potentially. So if the hub organization is able to host folks who are displaced for a certain amount of time, especially if they have backup power. Again, this is kind of hypothetical, but if they have backup power and they're really that go-to place for displaced residents in a power outage or larger emergency, what can be done to help support the folks that are going through the trauma of the situation at the time. So a lot of times for kids, it means entertainment options, having ways for them to take their mind off of what's going on and what's happening around them. So some of the hubs have been able to we've kind of worked with them. They have like games on hand or books or material like coloring books that kids could play with, things like that. And then also a lot of the hubs are very oriented towards food being really helpful in traumatic situations and helping folks kind of overcome the mental and physical strain of crisis situations. So having food supplies on hand to support hot meals. I think a lot of the orgs are like, sure, we want to have dry goods on hand, but also like a priority for us is to, if the power goes out, can we still cook? Can we still make hot food, hot meals? Because, nourishment in emergencies is really important. So that's, and then again, that's kind of coming from these organizations themselves. A lot of them specialize in food distribution and in food insecurity support. So I think those are just some of those considerations that I meant by that. And is there seating for people to sit rather than having to sit on the floor? Are there blankets? Are there, other just kinds of comforting items to have? So, I think obviously in emergency support, those things maybe aren't front and center, but also are important if and when displacement does occur.
Yep. So there's six questions left. I'm going to try to knock out 3 of them in one question to you. There's a series of questions sort of focusing on your communication strategy. So, how do you, do you use social media? Do you do it through email? Somebody who sort of lives in a neighborhood and wants to know if there's a hub nearby, how do they find out? Is there a database of hubs somewhere? Or, where is that tracked? So what is the sort of communication strategy for the hubs?
Yeah, so we have a page on our sustainability office website dedicated to the Resiliency Hub program with that map of sites. And there's a lot of information there just about what the program is about. I would say the communications about like where the hubs are and where the closest hubs are, I think a lot of that comes from the organizations themselves as like being able to center their work themselves and like we're a resiliency hub, for our community. A lot of them all have their own communications channels with their neighborhood, surrounding neighborhood. We also have signs that we print like on big kind of vinyl weatherproof sheets that hubs can put on the side of their building to identify themselves as a resiliency hub. I think there's a picture. No, I stopped sharing. Sorry about that. It's not moving. There we go. Here you go. The fan. So I don't know if you see hub in that, like in the back there. It says there's like the purple.
Yeah.
Or the white sign with the purple circle that says hub. There's a lot of information on there about, it says First Mount Calvary Baptist Church Resiliency Hub, and then has a phone number to call and has just information on like, it says like your go-to place for snow and extreme heat and, et cetera. So they have that up in their main kind of gathering area. So that's just an example. They, can request the signs to have on site so that residents can know that they're a resiliency hub. And then, I think a lot of the communication around what their role is, what they want to be able to do, how they support their community comes from them. Again, that kind of self-determination, self-identification of a resiliency hub. And so a lot of that outreach work is from the organization themselves.
Great. So we're getting down to the wire. Is there a role for schools in the program at all? I mean, I know you mentioned some schools, but I mean, are they formally involved? You know, if you have kids who are in a school at the time of a disaster or hazard or an emergency, is there any way of converting a school into a hub?
Yeah, so this like schools are actually outside of the scope of this program because this is community org centered, so non-government buildings. But I think the school system has their own kind of resiliency work that goes on and their own coordination and collaboration with the Office of Emergency Management, as are rec centers, recreation centers. And so they kind of have their own emergency protocols. I do know that schools have been opened up for various emergency situations in their neighborhoods. And that really, is because the Office of Emergency Management is like, there's an incident here, there's a school right there, we're gonna call the school administrator, see if they can open up and help, with what's going on. And so I know that that happens pretty regularly. But as far as, again, the resiliency side of, the schools having solar and battery, that would be up to the school system to figure out kind of how to do that. I think schools just have such different funding sources and requirements and restrictions. And, I think there's just so much nuance there that this program would really have to be so robust and so large to be able to consider the, community-based groups plus the schools, plus the rec centers, plus libraries, to really be like, hey, how do we get all of these outfitted with solar and battery and all, have certain level of energy efficiency and supplies on hand and stuff like that. Like, amazing. That's the ideal. I would love for it to be like that. I just think it would, just need to really evolve and grow in a way where there's a lot more capacity to do that, which right now, again, we're just really focused on expanding this and in creating these investments in community-based organizations and in located like in the center of communities that trust them and go to them. But schools are trusted places in so many senses. So that would be amazing. I mean, that's been something I've been thinking about doing more of, is figuring out how to engage the school system so that they have ownership over that kind of resiliency work, and maybe could create a program similar, but kind of within, the administration of the school system.
Okay, so we're getting down to the wire. I mean, do the hubs talk to each other? Do they, are there sort of hub town halls where they share best practices or experiences, or how does that, is it the sort of one-way communication between the city and each hub?
Yeah, no, so we've been coordinating a lot. So I think I had, so that bottom bullet point there, we've had a lot of, since the pandemic started especially, it was actually a request from the resiliency hubs to have regular check-in meetings. We were doing like quarterly before, but now it's been really regular. Every single month we've had meetings to discuss pandemic related concerns, climate hazard related concerns, and then also facilitate that peer-to-peer learning between the organizations. So every meeting we have actually spend like 15 to 20 minutes doing icebreakers with them, just even though they're already familiar with each other at this point, just so they can keep learning about what each org is doing. They can report out, and I really try to like center their work and their needs in each meeting, rather than me just like talking at them. For example, I try to frame it with a question of, what is your organization doing right now, or would be interested in doing right now to rise, to support your community in the extreme heat season that's upcoming? Or what are some concerns and needs that your community might have in advance of this winter season, for example? And then we just, each org will, like, each leader that's on the call will present out, talk about what they're currently doing, talk about what needs they might be seeing, and concerns they might be having, or even, what concerns they've heard from the community. And then kind of that's how we open up each meeting. And so then we have myself and someone from our Office of Emergency Management on in the meeting, as well as maybe a health department person if possible. A lot of them are so focused on COVID response right now. Their time is very tough to get, but we always have city staff on the call. And then we always try to figure out how to support and help. And then also, yeah, the hubs have opened up dialogues with each other as well because of these meetings. And even some of them have had, like, for example, excess food that they were not able to get out, and then they'll work with one of the other hubs that might be consistently having food shortages and help get them additional supplies just based on, you know, their another org surplus. So that's happened before too, is additional partnership building.
Okay. I'm gonna try to, there's two questions. They don't necessarily go together, but I'm gonna try to like wrap it up with these two questions so that you can, you don't go hoarse from all the questions we've asked you today, but it's been a really great back and forth. One question is, if you know, community resilience managers, is there a certain profile or a job description that you know, or are all different types of people from all different sort of backgrounds and, you know, sort of disciplinary expertise, you know, are they all sort of eligible? And then the last question would be sort of what next? You know, you showed heat maps, but are you looking at other, you know, sort of sources of vulnerability to try to locate hubs in strategic places?
Do you mind repeating that first one again?
If there's a job description for a resiliency manager at one of the hubs.
Oh my goodness.
I avoided that one before.
I'm just reading some of these comments. I just want to appreciate you all everyone's feedback. Sorry, I had the presentation up and was not seeing all the comments, so I was just getting pulled to that. But I'm glad I was able to share some good ideas for everybody, and I'm happy to be reached out to for additional questions and follow-up, because I think some people have to pop off. But yeah, so the resiliency program is only like a smidge of my job, but I wish I could spend more time on it, as always. So I feel very privileged to be able to be in this position as a climate resilience planner working on this kind of program. So yeah, I think, you know, there's so much community facing work around this that needs to happen. I really emphasize being like, all these hub partners have my cell phone number. They can call me whenever they need to. I really care a lot about being available and present as like a city staff, city employee. I think being accessible can be very powerful in building that trust. If these organizations reach out with questions, even if it doesn't really pertain to being a resiliency hub, I will not just say, oh yeah, you go to Department of Transportation and ask that. I will say, I will look into this for you. I'll reach out to DOT. I'll try to find that answer, and then I will get back to them with an answer rather than the runaround. And I think as government employees, like, that kind of customer service is very, you know, a lot of people do that. A lot of cities have folks that do that. I hear time and time again that that's one of the most important factors kind of in the success of this program, is just that responsiveness, that willingness to be a listening ear. So as far as like more, I think, you know, climate resilience work should not stay guarded within city government. It should not be gate kept. It needs to be community facing. It needs to be trust building. It needs to you know, focus on justice and equity issues, and it has to serve at that intersection of all the other kind of issues that cities are facing these days, not just focusing on climate, not just keeping the definition narrow, but really focusing on all the kind of social, economic vulnerability and other, you know, health considerations that really intersect. And yeah, so the job description is very broad, but I think there are some certain skills that can like really help make this successful, just, you know, by being community facing, being willing to take risks, and being kind of, I guess, scrappy to like get resources aligned together in as many ways as possible. And I think I like bug other city agencies all the time to be like, hey, DOT, like, this resiliency hub requested, you know, additional salt supplies in advance of, like, you know, the winter season, and they haven't had this request fulfilled yet. Like, can you expedite this? Like, I will poke other city agencies to try to have better resource delivery to hub organizations. So yeah, I think, you know, my work spans from like broad planning, like disaster planning, climate action planning, but then also has like very specific program development projects like this. So I don't know, it's kind of both. I can't even come up with one specific one, but I appreciate that question. Yeah, I see the go-to person. Yeah, I like to think of myself as a go-to person, as a resource. I just really try to be a resource. Because I do feel like the more that community members are engaged in conversations around climate and resilience and just other issues, like the better. So the more accessible it is, the better. And then what was that second question?
Well, that second question is sort of like, what's next? So you've done heat mapping of the city. You've got these hubs. Are you gathering other data sets, to sort of organize this program in any other ways, or is it just sort of going on its own?
I think we're really trying to work with the health department to get more health data that can be understood in tandem with climate. We do work with, for example, like Johns Hopkins researchers, especially in their climate and earth sciences division, to better understand, or program, and Bloomberg School of Public Health to better understand those like climate and health connections, and direct like air quality linkages as well. So I know that like air quality and climate change, I think there's just more being done at that intersection to better understand the health implications of air quality, both acute and long-term exposure. And I think, yeah, there's just ongoing conversations around what's the most recent and accurate data that then we can use to better understand interventions. Again, I mentioned like resiliency hubs are only one tool. They're not meant to like be the end all be all for building resilience and improving, community access to resources, but, continuing to better understand climate and health vulnerability along with those other indicators is going to be, something that we revisit often. And then, working with the organizations as experts themselves, like these community leaders know so much about what they're seeing and hearing in their community, who's being affected by what, and to what extent, that having that kind of anecdotal and lived experience data to complement the scientific and empirical data that we are trying to gather as well. I think, making sure that those things are both being sought at the same time is where this is, going to be most powerful moving forward, because we're really in this era of compounding crises, we're, seeing all of these climate conditions right now in the context of a pandemic. Who knows what's to come, but the more that we can be working with and alongside communities, opening up those communications, those relationships, in, kind of just every day, the more that that's going to be really helpful in, no matter what type of crisis situation arises. So I think, that's where this is going to keep going, is just better understanding, that these risks are there, these risks are increasing, and the more that we can do to just even have conversations, to open the doors for more resources, to have the right people at the table, having each other's contact information, having each other's phone numbers, feeling like government is accessible. I think that's the answer there, but it just needs to happen at scale. I think that's just, I just keep trying to scale up this program so that I can touch as many people as possible. So.
Well, and you've done it. It's such an amazing program. Thanks so much for today, for sharing all this with us, and for your work in general. And I must say that you've also, I think, you've answered 43 questions. Remember that many questions at once.
Oh my gosh. I'm just thrilled that everyone was so engaged. Thank you all for listening to me speak for this long.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving us your time and your inspiration. So with that, I think we're going to close this session and look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, Aubrey.